Hello and welcome. I'm Sarah Bearup-Neal, Gallery Manager with the Glen Arbor Arts Center. Today, as part of the Arts Center's Vessels exhibition, I'm in conversation with Laura Quackenbush, a Leelanau County museum curator with a special interest in traditional Anishinaabe arts. In 1987, the Leelanau Historical Society began documenting, interpreting, collecting, and preserving birch bark and quillwork baskets and black ash baskets. In 2005, a conservation grade exhibition space was created to display this collection. There are now more than 600 historical objects in the collection that give insights into 19th and 20th century culture of the Odawa and the Ojibway people, whose ancestral lands in the upper Great Lakes include Leelanau County and Grand Traverse County. Laura Quackenbush played an instrumental role in the creation of the collection and the space in which it's displayed. And hello to you today, Laura.
Good morning.
Can you explain for us the multi-layered role of baskets in Anishinaabe culture? What was their function, the culture, and what was their function outside the culture?
Well, I'm a museum curator, and what we do is interpret material culture. So what we do is we look at objects and we look at everyone and try to tell the story of this object. Not only how it's made, how it was created, the cultural history of that similar object, but also, what we see. It has a story to tell. So that's the way we look at all material culture. As a museum curator, that's how I do it. Whether it's something sitting in my home or the collection that's here at the museum. So what are all the stories behind this? Well, the objects that the museum has collected and exhibited are things that actually were produced by the people who lived here in Leelanau County and some Grand Traverse County during the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century, using natural resources that they had accessible. This was a transition time. I guess it's always been transition, but really the objects here had one big commonality, and that was most of what we have here was produced by families, Anishinaabe families, to sell. They commodified a natural, a long time tradition of basket making and other ways of making objects that they needed to live, to also earn some cash money to support their families. And it was an important part of that income producing for the families during that period of time when there are not many options open to them.
So the baskets functioned, had a functional purpose within the family, but you're also saying they also had a commercial purpose outside the culture.
Well, yeah, because basket making was for families. I always want to say, well, it was probably a cottage industry, something that they were doing together as a family to produce. But that's part of the whole culture. They commodified many things that were traditional ways of living for them. They produced maple syrup and huge amounts of maple sugar to sell, in the early times to traders and the explorers and the early settlers here. And then settlers started doing so many things were modified in order to sustain themselves. They were survivors, and they were very creative about finding that. And actually, that was one way they did. They made many of the things that they used to make traditionally, they made as commodities, so to speak, so that they could survive.
The baskets and things made with materials taken from the natural world degrade over time through use and because they're breaking down naturally. So how were so many of these objects found and how were they collected, given that they began as objects that have some kind of inherent fragility? And I'm thinking that there might have been a lot of baskets that we don't know about because they just disintegrated.
Well, that's true. And actually, there's very little archaeological evidence of, for instance, black ash basketry because, you know, natural materials don't survive very well under the ground. Cold and wet northern Michigan rots everything out. But these survived, the things that mostly came to this museum, because when we went out to look for these things, when I first became aware that this was an important part of the culture, unique culture of this area, I also knew that many of the people who lived in this area, mostly many resorters and tourists, actually had these objects in their families. They had been the people who they were being produced for.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Bailey's department store, the second floor, Lois and Carl just tell me, or Owen Bailey told me, you know, was just full of baskets because he would buy them all winter when people needed the money. And then he would sell them. And actually he went around the whole Northwest Michigan peddling his baskets because he had so many, you know, he had an excess of them. So
Mm-hmm.
they were bought by different stores and then resold in the store for pittance, you know, to, as exchange, and the people that were buying them were the resorters. So many of these things came, you know, most of them came from resorter families and also local residents.
Did you put out the word? Did you knock on doors? Did you follow up leads to find all these objects?
Well, we got a grant from the Michigan Council for the Arts in '87, I think it was,
Mm-hmm.
to do an inventory of Odawa and Ojibway arts. So we actually had 7 different sites around the county where we publicized our event. And I had a team of elders from the tribe and museum staff, and we went through and we did a written inventory and pictorial record of the baskets that people had. So they came to the Glen Arbor Township Hall. They came to it wasn't Blessed Gateri Tekakwitha then, it was Immaculate Conception Church in Bishabastown. They came to, I think we had one here at the museum. I mean, we had about 4 or 5 sites we went to,
Mm-hmm.
but then sometimes people would call us and then we'd go out and do individual things. But we had been big in gathering of these objects and recorded, got people's permission to record what they have. So we've got notebooks full of these records, and the elders helped us identify what was in those, how these were made, what materials they were used, and whether they had any other comments about how their thoughts about how they were categorized as their use.
Mm-hmm.
So I think very few were, that the Anishinaabeg families didn't keep most of them. I mean, they were to sell. This is what they have, and material culture has a different value for them. They're not very, you know, acquisitive, you know. They're a lot acquisitive in terms of these kind of things. That was my insight, and I should have prefaced all this, but lots of what I say today and share with people are things that I learned from the elders, because I knew many elders and had a lot of interaction with elders. So it's not anything that I inherently know. It's some of my observations, may be my suppositions based on what but you know, I'm just sharing knowledge that was given to me, you know.
I'm going to put a picture on the screen of this is one of the rooms in the collection exhibit space, and we can see some of the baskets there. So with that as our background, why don't you talk a little bit about traditional basket making? And specifically, I'm really interested in the whole process of passing along traditional skills and the place-based plant knowledge that people needed to have to create these baskets. And how did the practices of communal work play into the creation of the baskets?
Okay, let's start out saying this is what we call the basket room, the traditional arts basket room. within this space, and the museum dedicated the space at that point, blessed by the elders, to continue this space as an ongoing exhibit, so people had a place to come and look at these things time and time again if they wanted. So it is only a part of that collection, but it's representative of what we have. So, to go on to the other question, the processing of materials for baskets and any kind of traditional arts is knowledge that was passed on for thousands of years. It evolved over thousands of years and is passed. We call it traditional ecological information, TEK. That's the knowledge that's passed from generation to generation about the natural resources within their world, that they use to survive. So every one of these things that you have in here, whether it's a piece of a black ash basket like I have right here, or a birch bark container. Here's a vessel for you. This is a very utilitarian birch bark container. There's all methods, to carefully processing it so that you use the resource frugally and in respect to Mother Nature. And that's just knowledge that's passed on from time to time. I'm going to put an ad in here for people visiting the online exhibit, which is on the museum website, where there actually are a number of PowerPoints where this is all explained in detail. The materials that are used and some of the processes and the story of why basket making was a thing. I guess one layer that I love to put on this, and one reason that this got interesting to me, is because I saw a commonality then that, these people that bought the baskets were actually, some of them remember women coming to their cottage doors with baskets in sheets where they were sold them. And over time, they became very precious to these families. They are considered, very important parts of their lives in the North Country, and they treat them with great respect, although they might have had more utilitarian uses for them, because they made picnic baskets and market baskets and all kinds of baskets for functional purposes. I might come close to what you want me to say.
Well, I'm really interested in the piece of it that involves place-based knowledge of plants. And that's a good segue into the next question about climate change and ecological balance, and how those things are now affecting the making of black ash baskets and other traditional Anishinaabe arts. If you don't have the materials, or you don't know where the materials are, what does that do to your practice and your undertaking?
Well, no doubt, that climate change and development have changed the availability and the health of the things that are used, like birch trees. That's threatened. Black ash trees now are virtually unknown in Northwest Michigan due to the emerald ash borer has just decimated that whole ash population. Black ash trees from which they make the baskets are swamp trees. One elder told me, if you think it's an ash tree and your feet are wet, it's probably black ash, because that's where it lived. White ash is an upland tree that was also used in black ash baskets for handles and for the little ears that the handles go into. For anything that reinforced a basket was actually carved out of white ash, mostly by the men of a family. But those are interesting. We lose wetlands all the time, for sweetgrass. Every time I go into one of those craft stores and see little birch trees chunks for sale, my blood rises, because that's not exactly why they were put on this earth in terms of my looking at them from, and that actually decimates populations of birch trees, and actually is an issue up north a lot. So that's the way our world is now. Things are changing. We've evolved, and so these things go through cycles. And right now, the black ash is on a down cycle. Will it come back? I don't know.
And so that suggests that the making of baskets from black ash is on hold, or is it in something that's threatened by extinction? Go ahead.
I don't think it's threatened by extinction, but right now the resources aren't available right in our area. There are black ash trees up north, they're still making them out east. This is actually, black ash basketry is something that's from, what they used to call the eastern woodland areas, so they make many of them out on the east coast, but this whole area where we have the deciduous trees of black ash and white ash, and they call it brown ash tree. They made baskets. So you do that throughout this whole area. Get out in the prairies, of course they didn't, because they didn't have those kind of trees. So they use new resource that was available to them.
Your comment about walking into the big box craft store and seeing birch bark chunks for display purposes is interesting in light of our conversation, where it's inherent to the making of these baskets we've been talking about, to know where the plants come from, when they're right to borrow materials from. When you walk into a modern day craft store, you don't have those same kinds of understandings of origin and materials.
Right, and you don't have that very long centuries, thousands of years of knowledge that have been passed down. So it's not just the technical knowledge, there's also spiritual teachings that go with all, the gathering. And so there's talk about multi-layer. There is a whole nother layer that I'm sure I will never understand because I'm not Anishinaabe. So
some of the baskets in the collection are more decorative than others.
Yes.
These baskets used differently than the baskets that were designed for more practical purposes.
Right. And I think because they were being sold to people that were part of the, at least post-Victorian, they were interested in things like trinket boxes so they could put their rings in, or they could put, I have here this basket I keep popping up in here. This is a glove basket. So this would have been on your dresser, then you would have put your gloves in that. So they did make, and it's very fancy, it has black ash curls, and it has basswood here. This is basswood. So they made decorative baskets that were purely just for decoration, and that appealed to that clientele, But my favorites, of course, are the very functional baskets because they're so carefully made to be functional. They have one type of basket that they call the automobile basket because it was real narrow and it would fit between your front in the wheel well of your back seat. So it was very pragmatic, that they had baskets that serve certain functions. I'm looking across here. I'm at the museum right now. They have a magazine rack over here that I'm looking at. So that was another. They were catering to their buyers. No doubt about it. They were very canny about that. Lots of market baskets, because before we had little plastic bags, people took a basket to the market and to bring their stuff. Egg gathering baskets, flower gathering baskets which would be not for probably themselves, but the gardening ladies love to have their flower baskets. I have one here that is a cornucopia, so that's purely a decorative thing. That's probably not less, that's more decorative than functional. Function, but not totally. So, I think most of the baskets that are in the museum collection are very functional. They're waste baskets. They're, like I said, market baskets. They're the baskets that actually people would use in their homes. Used to be able to walk around in the old cottages and you go, oop, there's a basket. There's a wood basket. There's a waste basket. There's a market basket. That's part of the old family cottages around here in the whole, and down into Glen Lake area. One thing I'm still looking for is the Native Americans that actually lived in Glen Arbor and lived out maybe down on the Crystal River and somewhere, actually harvested blueberries, and sold them in baskets. They made little baskets
Mhm.
which I've always looked for one. I'm waiting for some cottager to say, I think I found one, you know, it's not been decorated. They would have been very simple baskets,
Mhm.
just made as your vessel to sell berries in, not as a
Mhm.
basket, much as a functional, you know, container, a vessel
Mhm.
to sell your berries. So.
Laura, I thank you so very much. Anyone who's interested in going more deeply into this, there's just a tremendous online history that Laura suggested earlier. And it not only goes into the history of these baskets and the people who make them, but there's a wonderful interview with a couple of elders. It's a tremendous resource.
Right.
One can go ahead. Go ahead.
One comment about that is that when I brought Linda Woods and Hank Bailey in to do that interview, we didn't have a name for this exhibit, that video. But Linda and Hank and I sat down and at my house, and I'm sitting there and there's baskets in my house. And Linda reached over and took a basket and said, this basket's my ancestor. And so I'm like going,
that's the title of the interview, isn't it?
That's how they look at these objects. It's they're part of their heritage, a deep part of their heritage. And they have many levels of, you know, interpretation, as we say today, that go into that it means to them. Yeah.
Well, people can find all this and much more at www.leelanauhistory.org. The Art Center's Vessels exhibition is going to be in the main gallery and online through October 27. And the Art Center's website is www.glenarborart.org. I thank you again, Laura.
You're welcome.
Everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time.